Biography and Historiography. The case of David Ben-Gurion. As is well known, David Ben-Gurion had an enormous impact on the history of modern Israel. Rarely have one person's thoughts, decisions, and actions had such an effect, for not only is the writing of Israeli history dominated by the towering figure of Ben-Gurion, but that history, in fact, the history of the entire Jewish people in the modern era, often takes the form of life writing by or about Ben-Gurion. Therefore, Ben-Gurion biography and Israeli historiography are strongly interrelated. This may allow us to observe transformations in Israeli historiography by observing changes in the biographical literature on Ben-Gurion, which itself impacts these changes. By outlining these transformations, this paper attempts to both highlight the relationship between biographical work and historiographical change, and to provide a conceptual framework for an analysis of that relationship. The case study discussed here allows us to do so because of Ben-Gurion's dominance in modern Israeli history, but there is reason to believe that the relationship may hold in a wide range of cases. This is so because biographical work is an important part of any society's self-consciousness about its history, and historiography may be defined as such self-consciousness. My argument is that biographies published on political leaders in a given polity play an important historiographical role, and may be analyzed both in terms of the historiographical trends they reflect, and the impact they have on these trends. The exact nature of the relationship between biography and historiography could of course be determined only after wide comparative analysis. One would want to know, for instance, how the biographies of Churchill, de Gaulle, Gandhi, Mandela, Nasser, and others written over the years reflect and affect historiographical changes in these leaders' respective countries. Though one case study is obviously no replacement for such a comparative study, it may be helpful in demonstrating the usefulness of exploring the biography-historiography relationship and in providing a conceptual framework for such an endeavor. In what follows, I propose a typology for the classification of biographies, and analyze changes over time in categories of Ben-Gurion life writing in relation to changing historiographical trends. I conclude with a note on the usefulness of the conceptual framework proposed here for future research. The typology. Biographies are mostly classified by their subjects. Bookstores, for instance, sort them by the name of the person whose life is being told, Lenin's biography, Kennedy's biography, and so on, or by a broader occupational category, literary biography for writers, political biography for political leaders. Current biographical research is often interested in classifications like new vs old or modernist vs postmodernist biography. The typology proposed in Figure 1 is concerned no less with the biographer than with the subject of the biography. I employ two criteria: orientation, defined by the overall approach the biographer takes towards the subject, and focus, defined by the perspective the biographer takes on the subject's position in his or her environment. The orientation criterion, identification, investigation, and utilization are the three variables of orientation. Identification. Biographers may approach a subject with a feeling that by telling the life story, their own lives are affected. Such identification does not necessarily have to involve a positive approach to the subject, although it most likely does. In theory, one may identify with a subject whose evil character is being recognized. Although identification is often seen as stemming from psychological motives, this does not necessarily have to be the case. One may identify with the subject of a biography on sociological grounds, for instance, as when the subject fulfills a social function, or provides political symbols to a community lacking them. Investigation. A biography may also be written as a means to learn in a cool manner about the subject, whether as a study by itself, or as part of a broader study. Although it has traditionally been seen as a unique intellectual endeavor, biography is often part of the human or social sciences by which we learn about ourselves. This orientation to life writing could be operationalized by an adherence to rules of investigation common in other fields, such as relative detachment between writer and subject, some actual use of social science methods, and so on. Utilization. This third variable refers to the writer's use of the subject as a means to advance a broader agenda. Time and resources are invested in life-telling to make a point. This broader agenda may be explicit or implicit, and the utilization may vary between subtle use and vulgar manipulation. The focus criterion, a personal, contextual, and mythological focus map out the three variables. Here, the personalfocus. The biographer may focus on the person whose life is being told, while family, community, society, polity, culture, and other contextual factors are, of course, referred to. The individual will always remain at center stage. Traditionally, this is what biography was expected to do, and in most cases, it probably still does. The contextualfocus. Here the biographer focuses more on the contextual factors within which the subject of the biography operates. By closing the distance between biography, history, and social science, this variable stresses the individual in context rather than in person, and deals with the interaction between a specific life and the social, economic, cultural, and political environment in which that life, or for that matter every life, is conducted. The mythological focus. When concentrating on individuals, biographies in this category focus not on a real person, but on someone greater than life. Similarly, when such biographies focus on context, the broader setting they discover tends to be more imagined than real. These two mythic dimensions could be expected to coincide. A biography of a mythological figure would, for instance, most probably also be situated in a messianic context, one devoid of real time and place. Although the distinction between the real and the imagined is not always easy to operationalize, this variable has great theoretical importance because it distinguishes between reality and myth in life writing. The orientation and focus criteria, designating three variables each, provide us with 9 types of biographies distinguished by the biographer, rather than by the subject of the biography. 1. Identification personal. The biographer engages in writing the life of another, usually admired person, as part of a personal search for identity. 2. Identification contextual. Here the biographer displays a similar admiration, affection, or empathy for the communal setting which the biography's subject epitomizes. 3. Identification mythological. This identification is oriented towards the image of the subject or the context, either of which, possibly as a result of an initial need for identification, has grown to the proportions of myth. 4. Investigation personal. The biographer investigates the subject because of a scholarly or intellectual interest in the person, or in human behavior in general. 5. Investigation contextual. A biography belonging to this category resembles other projects of social science research in its relatively detached analysis of those social, economic, cultural, or political factors illuminated by the subject's life story. 6. Investigation mythological. Here the biographer's investigation is preoccupied with mythological figures or settings, mostly, one may expect, in an attempt to break these myths. 7. Utilization personal. This category refers mainly to psychoanalytical work, in which biographical writing is used to test professional theories. 8. Utilization contextual. These biographies are written to justify a position prevailing in the public discourse. A societal or political agenda is advanced by emphasizing the deeds and mishaps of the biography's subjects in public life. 9. Utilization mythological. This category refers to the explicit manipulation of myths by ideologically oriented biographers as part of their realization that myths disseminated in any polity play an important part in recruiting mass support. As in every construction of a typology, a few words of caution are in order. First, biographies are usually more complex than an analytical categorization can capture. As a result, it must be expected that single biographies will often fall into more than one cell of the typology. Second, since biographies, by definition, deal with individuals, their allusions to conceptual and mythological dimensions may be more subtle than the above categorization implies. Third, biographers are obviously not obliged to follow the historiographical periods identified by the researcher. Such trends do not constitute a deterministic model. Different types of biographies which succeed each other in one context may coincide in another. Furthermore, any apparent trend in life writing will have its exceptions, since the personal preferences of biographers may override more general historical determinants. And yet, having said this, I wish to suggest that the typology I have described can serve as a means for showing how Ben-Gurion life writing can point us toward historiographical trends as they unfold and succeed one another over time. In fact, Ben-Gurion biographies actually follow a rather clear path corresponding to an identifiable transformation in Israeli historiography. After providing a short description of Ben-Gurion's life, I shall describe this path. Ben-Gurion, a brief history. David Green, who later changed his name to Ben-Gurion, was born in 1886 in the small town of Plonsk in Russian-dominated Poland. His primary education was in the traditional Jewish manner, learning the Bible, the Talmud, and books of prayer in small rabbinical schools. Tsarist rules restricting the number of students in Eastern Europe prevented the young man, intending to sail to Palestine as an engineer, from gaining a high school education. Like many leaders of his generation, then, he was largely self-taught. In 1906 Ben-Gurion went to Palestine as a pioneer. In 1911 he went to Constantinople to study law, but after the outbreak of World War I, he was expelled from the Ottoman Empire for his involvement in Zionist agitation. He returned to Palestine from the United States in 1918, and became a major leader of the Jewish workers' movement. In 1920 he was one of the co-founders of the General Federation of Labor, Histadrut, and served as its Secretary General for 15 years. In the early 1930s he led the struggle which gave the Jewish labor movement in Palestine control over the World Zionist Organization, then guiding the Jewish efforts to settle in Palestine. Soon becoming the main leader of the Jewish community in Palestine, he led the struggle against British rule, as Britain had received a mandate over Palestine from the League of Nations after World War I. In 1947, he accepted the United Nations resolution to partition Palestine between its Jewish and Arab inhabitants, who had been feuding or at war since the turn of the century. With the withdrawal of the British military from Palestine, on May 14 he proclaimed the Jewish state, and led Israel's war of independence against the ensuing Arab invasion. In the 1950s, as its first Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, Ben-Gurion led Israel's state-building efforts, absorbing Jewish immigrants from all over the world, establishing a working democracy, and constructing a modern army and various economic enterprises. In 1953, as part of his call for young Jews to settle the Negev desert, he moved his residence to Sde Boker, a desert kibbutz. In 1963, he resigned as a result of a fierce political struggle with his own Labour Party apparatus. The rift led him in 1965 to form his own political party, named Rafi, but the party received little support, and the aging man found himself rather isolated in Sde Boker at the end of his life. Ben-Gurion died in 1973. Ben-Gurion biographies. The fascination with Ben-Gurion all over the world quite naturally led to a great number of biographies being written in Israel and elsewhere. In addition, his life, thoughts, and deeds have been recurrent themes both in literature and in historical studies. His vast scholarly and intellectual activity, which he harnessed to the tasks of state building, represented an important component of his leadership, placing him at the center of Israeli discourse, which he dominated for 3 decades. Though a full demonstration of his impact on Israeli historiography would require examining huge amounts of material, even observing only those works belonging most clearly to the biographical genre, a partial list appears in the works cited. Demonstrates the roles his life story has played in Israel from the establishment of the state to the present. Early biographies, written shortly after the establishment of the state, clearly identify Ben-Gurion with a myth. From the 1960s onward, however, a restlessness with this myth evolves, especially among novelists, who pointed the way towards a self-conscious investigation of that myth and how it functioned in Israeli society. Such self-consciousness may be the reason for the appearance of biographies, especially in the 1980s, which can be characterized as contextual investigations of Ben-Gurion's Israel. Side by side with this trend, however, biographies also began to be written which fall into the utilization contextual category, namely, biographies which take a side in political controversies either that Ben-Gurion was involved in, or that preoccupy his biographers. Ben-Gurion's biographies may thus be described as roughly following over the years the trend marked in the typology by cells 3, 6, 5, 8. 1. The first era. The early biographies, such as those by Habas and Regev, published during Ben-Gurion's term as Prime Minister, are characterized by deep identification with a figure greater than life, so much so that Ben-Gurion had to defend himself against the claim that a cult of personality had evolved around him. This mystical approach is particularly apparent in biographies written by Jews living outside Israel, mainly in the United States. The cover of New York Times writer Gertrude Samuels's biography announces that it presents an unbiased and absorbing profile of the rebel and nation builder who willed the destiny of modern Israel. Inside the book, the rebel turns into a messiah. From the first page, for example, we are introduced to such familiar biblical images as a desert convoy and beleaguered Jewish travelers. Into this scary, hostile environment, Ben-Gurion will soon enter as an anchor of confidence. The contrast between the jeeps and soldiers hurrying through dangerous terrain, and the white-haired man who will make the one green spot in the desert, Kibbutz Sde Boca, his home, allows the biographer to present him as one who will redeem the Jewish people from their sad history. A triumphal portrait common to biographies of this era. Samuels dedicates B.G., fighter of Goliaths, to the children who fell in the ghettos and concentration camps. They never reached Israel. Her work, and other biographies falling into the same category, present Ben-Gurion as sharing those children's origins. His birthplace in Poland is portrayed as a traditional Jewish ghetto characterized by danger and poverty. Such fate, it is suggested, virtually ensured these families' fates. But not the Green family, Samuels insists, and several other American biographers also stress how the exposure of the Green family to modernist intellectual and cultural influences allowed the young David to reach his own conclusion that the only hope for Jews living in such ghettos lay in immigration to Israel. Such biographies map out a narrative common among Jews fascinated by the Zionist endeavor in Palestine. According to this story, modern Jewish history followed a clear route whereby oppression in the ghetto was succeeded by exposure to early 20th century Enlightenment, and then proceeded to Zionism. The emphasis on the traditional environment of Plonsk and its helplessness thus prepares the reader for Ben-Gurion, the lion of the desert, who manifests in his personality everything Jewish. Life in the past 2000 years lacked sovereignty, strength, and international recognition. Or as Samuels puts it, his life, from boyhood pioneer in Poland and farmer in Palestine, to journalist, labor leader, soldier, politician, diplomat, and world leader, dramatizes the rise of modern Israel and its place of moral strength in the world. 254. A biography by Banat Litvinov contrasts even more strongly the victorious life story of Ben-Gurion with the defeat and agony characterizing Jewish life in the past. Litvinov's opening pages describe his arrival in New York in 1951 in terms reminiscent of triumph parades of the Roman emperors. The island, here of course is Ellis Island, the landing dock for thousands of Jews escaping the horrors of Jewish life in the Pale of Settlement, and arriving on the safe shores of America at the turn of the century. However, offended they might be by Ben-Gurion's frequent declarations that Jewish life in the 20th century can only be lived in Israel, Litvinov and other Jewish biographers living abroad nevertheless contrasted his life story to their own, and saw in it the true fulfillment of biblical prophecies and dreams. Even a biographer like Dan Kurzman, whose identification is more with the man than with the myth, considers the life of Ben-Gurion as something more than the story of an extraordinary man. It is the story of a biblical prophecy, an eternal dream. 17. based on dozens of interviews. Kurzman's biography came out in 1983, long after the mystical era in Israeli historiography was over. Though Kurzman, a journalist by trade, dealt with many questions typical of the investigation contextual category, has still used messianic overtones when invoking Ben-Gurion and the State of Israel, and especially when dealing with the proclamation of the state on May 14, 1948, Tel Aviv bakes in the sultry heat of Hamsin, a merciless desert wind that seems to suggest a desire by God to test the fortitude and endurance of his chosen people even on this day of redemption, May 14. 1948-19. The Second Era. Israelis have never found the messianic overtones attached to the country and its leader easy to bear. Several novels, notably Aharon Meged's The Living on the Dead, address the difficulties of living in the shadow of a towering figure. Published in 1965, Meged's novel tells the story of a writer facing trial for not completing the epic story of the legendary founding father. Davidov, a transparent reference to Ben-Gurion's first name, David. The novel explores the tormented conscience of a generation haunted by its own commitment to perform in a way Ben-Gurion demanded of it. He had called upon Israelis to build a state that would constitute a light unto the nations, but this was not easy for Israelis. The tasks of state building were often hard enough without the additional burden of a messianic ideology. In response, Meged's protagonist falls into nihilism, scattering the pages of the Book of Davidov, never to be completed. I do not want an ambush in my home, he writes, a nest of rustling memories under my bed, eyes observing my thoughts. I want to be my own master. I want rest. 229. The Quest for Rest, or for a Perfect Peace, is the title of Amos Oz's 1982 novel. On the end of the Ben-Gurion era would have it, led to a different approach to biography. After Ben-Gurion stepped down from power in the mid-1960s, biography took a far more investigatory personal turn. In his important 1959 Ben-Gurion biography, Robert Street John had already taken a rather non-mystical approach to the Prime Minister, trying instead to describe his leadership from a political perspective. Only in the 1970s, however, did the investigatory orientation take a firmer hold, though not without difficulty, for his biographer Michael Bar Zohar admitted in The Armed Prophet in 1966, it was still a struggle to achieve any distance from his subject, or to avoid total absorption by the towering figure. I have tried to be impartial, Bar Zohar writes, but, like all those who write the lives of great men in history, I have found it very difficult. No ordinary criterion can be applied to Ben-Gurion, and his colleagues and associates seem small, pale figures besides thus David who is Goliath, This admission is interesting because Bar Zohar was himself one of those associates, and in fact, however much he may have talked about escaping the myth, Bar Zohar frequently utilized it during those political struggles he participated in side by side with Ben-Gurion. When Ben-Gurion, disenchanted by the Labour Party leadership, formed the Rafi Party in 1965, Bar Zohar was one of the close disciples who joined him. Furthermore, his biography, based on Ben-Gurion's private papers, could be seen as a tool in the political struggle within Israel's labor movement in the 1960s. At the same time, though, this biography does also represent a move towards the realization, if not yet the practice, that life-telling must take an impartial turn. Or as Bar Zohar puts it, what ultimately made for a more impartial trend in Ben-Gurion life writing was the development of a self-conscious scholarship in Israel in the 1970s and 1980s. At that time, studies in economics, sociology, political science, and modern history flourished in academia, and as I have described elsewhere, important studies stripped the figure of Ben-Gurion of its messianic dimensions and placed him in the state-building context. Particularly important was an article by historian Israel Kolat which set the stage for self-conscious research on Ben-Gurion in the years ahead. Kolat explicitly raised methodological and ethical problems involved in the study of Israeli history in light of Ben-Gurion's life. Even in the case of a towering leader Like Ben-Gurion, Kolat warns, a personality cannot be treated as a manifestation of the entire objective and subjective factors operating in a people's history. Kolat also mentions Tolstoy's criticism of a view of history as the making of great leaders, though he goes on to suggest that the more complex the social and technological systems within which we operate, the more important decisions by leaders are. Following Kolat's example, other studies began to analyze Ben-Gurion's leadership with the institutions and processes he shaped and operated within. At this point, traditional biography largely gave way to theory. Abraham Avihai's approach is typical. The Third Era, spanning the past 4 decades, the most extensive biographical effort on Ben-Gurion has been Shabtai Tevitt's series of volumes. The enormous detail with which Tevitt treats Ben-Gurion's life places these volumes in every possible cell of my typology. I would argue, however, that while this work constitutes an important investigation of the man and the context in which he operated, Tevitt's extraordinary devotion to his subject ultimately places this work in the utilization contextual category. What I am referring to here is Tevitt's tendency to continue the political fights Ben-Gurion waged during his lifetime by engaging in fierce, highly public, political discourse over Ben-Gurion's actions and decisions. Even as he wrote the overall biography, Tevitt frequently published monographs devoted to those controversies. In 1996, for example, in Ben-Gurion and the Holocaust, Tevitt makes explicit his intention to play a part in evaluating Ben-Gurion's efforts during the Holocaust. While the Holocaust was still at its height, Tevitt writes, it was already being politicized. Tevitt describes the historiographical literature on the subject as resembling the film Rashomon, in which each witness has a different version of the same horrific crime, shaped by ulterior motives and the desire to blame others. One version is that of historians who argue that, in their supposedly single-minded focus on the creation of the Jewish state in Palestine, Zionist leaders there, and especially David Ben-Gurion, who was serving at the time as chairman of the Jewish Agency, the governing body of the Jewish community in pre-state Israel, were willing to sacrifice the non-Zionist Jews of Europe in furtherance of their goal. 6. A counterversion is that of writers such as Tevitt himself, who argue that beyond a few spurious sources, there is no support for such charges against Ben-Gurion and the Zionist leadership. Indeed, my own research, writes Tevitt, unequivocally refutes these charges and demonstrates beyond question that Ben-Gurion's thinking was quite the opposite of what his critics allege. If he could have rescued all the Jews of Europe by sacrificing the state, he would have done it. XXI. The biographer is therefore as explicit as can be about his role. This work, then, is another pro-Ben-Gurion voice in the politicized debate on Jewish rescue efforts during the Holocaust. Its aim is to examine the charges of collaboration and murderous indifference and to document Ben-Gurion's efforts to rescue the Jewish people. XXI. In the same manner, Ben-Gurion and the Palestinian Arabs, From Peace to War, another spin-off from Tevitt's huge biographical work, suggests that Ben-Gurion's thinking on the relations between Jews and Palestinians not only warrants study because it is influential and exemplary, but also because it has been misinterpreted. There is a view abroad, resting almost exclusively on Ben-Gurion's own public pronouncements. Tevitt writes that Ben-Gurion was naive about the depth of Arab political aspirations and Arab determination to resist the Zionist transformation of Palestine. This view may be refuted, Tevitt contends, by the biographer's tools, that is, by comparing these pronouncements to Ben-Gurion's private reflections, committed to paper in his diary, in letters, and in the protocols of closed meetings. Tevitt's work can therefore be seen as representing a growing trend in today's historiography, the turning of historical writing in general, and of biographical writing in particular, into a battlefield. Impressed by an apparently close tie between knowledge and power, postmodernist scholars leave little room for historical writing, or for that matter, for life-telling, devoid of political connotations. In this context, Ben-Gurion scholars are classified not by intellectual or methodological categories, but by their position with their subject, either in general pro, vs, con, or in regard to particular situations. There are those, for instance, who support Ben-Gurion's strategic and tactical moves during the War of Independence, and those who emphasize his mistakes. There are those who consider him a Democrat, and those who consider him an authoritarian, and so on. These historical rivalries often quite accurately mirror broader political positions. Led by Tewitt, the old historians, who are supportive of Ben-Gurion, are also associated with the Labour Party, while the new historians, who mostly represent a radical left, attack Ben-Gurion for his harsh policies vis-a-vis Palestinian Arabs, his activist foreign policy, his failure to negotiate peace in the Middle East in the early 1950s, and his sense of adventurism, especially with regards to his decision to join England and France in the Sinai Campaign of 1956. It is hard to tell whether this politicization of historical discourse, in Israel and elsewhere, is a passing trend, or whether it will have a lasting impact on historical research and biographical writing in the country. Conclusion. Biographical writing plays an important role in the process by which a society develops a self-consciousness about its history. Though the social sciences frequently place biography as secondary to deterministic and probabilistic models of social action, even they cannot deny the importance of this role. Life writing, particularly of political figures, is a component of our historiographical thinking. Among other things, it tells us who we are and where we are going. And since biography and historiography are interrelated, it will be worthwhile to develop conceptual tools that allow us to explore that interrelationship. The typology of biographies proposed in the study has allowed us to observe changes in Ben-Gurion life writing with reference to major historiographical trends, mainly the trend from an identification with the myth of Ben-Gurion to a tendency to utilize his life story as part of the political battles of the day. Since historical research has always played a major role in Israel's political battles, the utilization of Ben-Gurion life writing to make political points should not be surprising. But the trend whereby the subject of biography moves from a mythic to a non-mystical figure may extend beyond the Israeli context. One, for instance, might predict that the trend signified in the typology by cells 3, 6, 5 might be apparent in other countries, and mainly new ones. In the new countries of Asia and Africa, which received independence after World War II, mythological leaders played an important role in the struggles for independence, and in the mobilization of support afterwards. Biographies have always been an effective means for the perpetuation of such myths in many of these countries. However, the morning after independence led to that self-reflection often associated with abandonment of the myth. State building, at least where it partly succeeded, came to be associated not only with such figures as Nasser, Nehru, Castro, or Kenyatta, but also with the social and political settings, however imperfect, these figures shaped. As a result, serious research on biographies written in these settings, or about them, when non-democratic governments exist which prevent open biographical work may prove to be as revealing about the settings as about the leaders' myths. Whether the trend of politicization found in the Israeli context will occur elsewhere depends on several factors. Such politicizing has definitely occurred in Western countries in which postmodern intellectual trends have taken hold. Ultimately then, the degree of politicization may depend on the degree to which postmodernism will prove to be a passing fashion, or a sound and stable component of our historical consciousness. Whatever the outcome, it may be worthwhile to watch the interplay between categories 5 and 8 in biographical writing, that is, between biographies written with the intent to investigate political figures in their context, and those concerned mainly with political justification. Nor are the trends giving rise to biographies that fit into category 8 exclusively scholarly. The growing public and media attention to political biographies, measured by the large number of biographies reviewed in literary supplements all over the world, is raising the demand that a biographer should contribute to prevailing themes in the political discourse. The days of the biographer whose main concern is life-telling, as represented by Categories 1 of 4 may be over, at least for the time being. Another general trend worth investigating could be represented by arrows leading from Category 9 to Categories 4, 5, or 6. We may expect to see this trend where the totalitarian grip is being loosened, such as those countries in Eastern Europe now struggling on the road to democracy. Totalitarian countries explicitly manipulate myths. As totalitarianism diminishes, an era of investigation begins which not surprisingly focuses on the persons and contexts, or on the myths themselves, and the processes used for their construction and dissemination. It would be useful to investigate biographical writing in light of this trend, for not only is the myth of political leaders a major building block of totalitarian regimes, but the way this myth is handled later may give us important clues for an understanding of the ways in which such countries are coping with their new freedoms. Examples like these should suffice to point to the possibilities opened to us by an investigation of biography as reflecting and inducing historiographical changes. Just as political leadership plays a role in our lives, so do the mental pictures we develop of that leadership. Do we consider leaders to be human beings, or superhumans greater than life? Are we able to maintain an objective perspective in our approach to them, or do they play a major role in the construction of our own self? Is our approach to politics one of concern with social, economic, and cultural factors, or are we merely concerned with personalities, or with mythological images of these personalities? Are we myth perpetuators, or capable of investigation of our own myths? How capable are we of thinking in historical terms, or rather, in making history part of our current affairs, thus heating up the political discourse on the one hand, and fighting the wars of the past on the other? Biography, I would conclude, may play a far more important role than has been realized in the construction of such alternating mental pictures. A systematic investigation of this genre may thus enhance our understanding of our political history.